One of the most important people in college football, one of the most powerful people in college football is the Commissioner of the SEC, Greg Sankey. I hope all is well. Welcome into the game in T-Town.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Short drive, but all is well.
Yeah, we like this.
Yeah, I'm going to make you drive a little bit next year, but it'll be okay.
Yeah.
Take an adventure to Nashville the year after, and
well,
then we'll see.
I'll say this. Media were supposed to be unbiased, but in the room a couple of days ago when we were up there, and you said Atlanta and Nashville, I thought about coming up and giving you a big hug because our budget, Dallas is a little more of a drive.
Yeah.
And I know Dallas was on the table, at least we thought it was.
Yeah, we've talked about that. I mentioned Las Vegas right at the beginning just to see if people were paying attention.
Well, Las Vegas is cheap because you can get cheap air.
Yeah, given that we have a bowl game there, I thought that might resonate just to wake people up at the beginning of the day. But Atlanta and Nashville will be, I think, healthy, and they're in kind of this center triangle, and if you plot it, which we've done, I think the geographic center of the conference is exactly an hour drive or so, 100 miles north of here. So, here to Nashville is around that perimeter, and Atlanta with what we do in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium with the championship game, the College Football Hall of Fame makes that an appropriate destination.
Well, let me brag on Hoover here for just a couple of minutes. And I know Atlanta was their first time, and it's hard to judge them based on 1 year when these guys have got 15 years of practice. These guys do a great job.
Absolutely. In fact, big picture, how it's happened in baseball with our tournament here in Hoover. We had a record crowd. They've built a facility for us around the Hoover Met that if people have not been a part of the SEC baseball tournament, it's a whole different atmosphere than it was over, even 5 years ago. And that's a credit to Hoover and the Winfrey Hotel and the environment here. And as we've grown, the demand on space is much greater today than 10 years ago with the SEC network, Marty and McGee shooting. We've got our own needs that have multiplied. And through it all, the folks at the Winfrey and Hoover have been outstanding. Absolutely.
And Radio Row is very popular. And, I guess I would say, stretched out in the hallway. I'm sure you've seen. Maybe, I haven't counted, but I would imagine between 40 and 50 stations is my guess.
Yeah, at the end, we do a calculation on the number of interviews I've participated in as commissioner, and we topped 3 figures last year, which, in 100 days, when you're doing average of 20 to 30 interviews every day, that's a little bit of work, but it's a tribute to people. And, when we move around, what we don't want to do is remove local radio like this, local beat writers, local television stations, because part of what we do here is not part of it, it's SEC Media Day, so we want to make sure that the media has their needs met, and we get to talk about football for a week in July.
All right, let me slip in one baseball question, then we'll go back to football. 11.7 scholarships in-state here in the state of Alabama. And it's hard because sometimes it's not on an equal playing field with some of your state-supported scholarships of other schools are able to benefit from. What kind of discussion behind the scenes is going on with that 11.7? Any discussions there?
There will be at the conference level, and we expect to insert some ideas nationally. The reality around scholarships is we freed up a lot of institutional academic aids. You saw Auburn go to the College World Series this year, and I think with the stadium and the opportunities at Alabama that they'll continue to build. There are differences, so we'll have universities have access to this state scholarship, state lottery scholarship you mentioned, others that incentivize academic aid. Vanderbilt's private and meets unmet need of all their students. But fundamentally, you get back to 11.7 and ask, why is that the number? Well, it was 13, and then there was a 10% reduction in the early 90s nationally. But why does that have to remain the number as we move forward, given that we had over 2 million fans at our baseball games? The facility investment, again, we look at what's happened in Tuscaloosa and Starkville, what's happening in Florida right now with a new stadium. Kentucky opened a new place. And, there's time to address the support of baseball, and I've been vocal about the need for coaching adjustments for the volunteer position, but also talked about a deeper look at the equivalency scholarship model, which really goes beyond baseball to other sports, softball, track and field, and others.
The Commissioner of the SEC, Greg Sankey, sitting down with us at SEC Media Days. One of the things that we discuss, and we're a college football show 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. We celebrate the sport of college football. But we're also understanding that some of the problems that faces other colleges are not what we face in Tuscaloosa, but you try to stay ahead. The attendance conversation, because we were down at Destin, we broadcast live down there for the entire week, and I know it was a big discussion for a lot of athletic directors. Where is that on your radar of making sure fans continue to go to the games and that the attendance does not drop in the average and all that? How is that on your plate?
Well, it's a continuing conversation whenever we meet. The conference for well over a decade has been involved in fan surveys where we can produce for our athletics directors information around fan feedback. Here's the priorities that we want to introduce for conversation, and that's in some places resulted in concession prices being adjusted. A piece of the alcohol conversation was what is it that fans want? And the desire there is, a beer and a hot dog at a football game is fun. 19 beers and 2 hot dogs at a football game is a problem. So we want to moderate that and have our schools oversee that appropriately. I think you've seen adjustments in scheduling. We have talked with our athletics directors about trends around 10 quality autonomy 5 games. You've seen adjustments rather than those not preseason, but early season neutral site games. The Texas series that Alabama's negotiated, I think, is a nod to the head that we want to bring people into our stadium, even for big non-conference games. And so you're seeing adjustments. I think some of the plans that have been announced for stadium construction or reconstruction, remodeling, and refurbishment, both in Tuscaloosa and other places, are again a nod to making sure people come out. But it's more than just the game, it's the tailgating, it's the weekend, it's the time commitment that people make to being home, which is what they do when they come to a game at one of our campuses. It's often homecoming every week is one way to look at it. So there's events and concerts that attract people to that particular event. We have had conversations about kickoff time, so that's embedded, and I'll stop after the kickoff time, but we established media contracts back in 2008. And I think the question indicates the world's changed since 2008. So as we think forward, what flexibility or adjustments are there? Right now, there isn't much. But might that be part of future conversations, which are still a number of years away? But those all are on, I think, everybody's mind.
Are you concerned about attendance?
Yeah, we should be. I like our position. We've 21 years straight leading the nation in attendance. But when our athletics directors want to have the conversation and are working diligently to fill their stadiums, then we need to be attentive to that conversation.
We're talking to Greg Sankey as we continue the conversation. It's certainly a lot of fun, and I wear the SEC T-shirt. I mean, when you're in Tuscaloosa, you reach out and you get a lot of radio interviews across the country, and they throw darts at that game, the non-conference week in November, and everybody does it, but the SEC has that. Right before Auburn, Alabama plays Western Carolina. Well, this is my opinion. I'd like to see that game be a little bit, because we get picked on a little bit because the scrutiny is there. And I have to defend the SEC of going, everybody plays.
Right, that's right.
But SEC does it in
everybody plays. They may play in September, but we have a conference game in opening week.
Sure.
And we're not selling a television network, by the way, which is why some other people, and we've done it. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but we're playing Vanderbilt and Georgia, which could be a big game. Georgia's preseason predictions are lofty. Vanderbilt comes off a bowl game. And then we play games in week 2. I think we have 2 conference games in week 2, and I think 3 games in week 3. Other conferences don't play those games until later in the year, later in September. And that means that they book all of their games at the end of the season. And we don't take that approach. Now, we've talked about modifying it. We'll have some schedules announced in the future to see how we might adjust, and we'll see. That's just a hint of some change. We've seen some reference change before, hypothetically, around future schedules. But the reality is you have to, when you start playing games the first week of the season or the second week of the season, that means you have to fill gaps in November. That's just natural. The rigor of the SEC schedule is what we should be talking about. The rigor of the SEC schedule is unique among our peer conferences, without a doubt. The West, in some ways, is unique, but I think
toughest
the East
division
is now
in college football,
making the kind of progress we want to see the balance again. So the rigor of the conference schedule is meaningful, and that informs our decision making. And I appreciate what other people say, but they're playing a lot of games in September that we're not playing, and you're going to make a schedule that fits.
Well, hey, listen, I keep a running note of challenges for ADs, and my list is getting quite long. So I appreciate the time of discussing a few of those. And
I had 3 pages of items that could have been put into my speech on Monday.
well, you're welcome to look at mine.
Probably sync up there.
But
right?
they do, and we always enjoy the conversation.
Same. Thanks for being here.
Thank you again.
Absolutely.
Greg Sankey, the Commissioner of the SEC.